Welcome to a deep dive into neuroscience, especially for you.
That's right.
We're going to be taking a look at some of the textbook excerpts and research papers you've shared,
Okay.
really kind of tackling this question.
Yeah.
What makes us human?
Yeah.
We're going to be exploring the brain, how it's structured, how it functions, and how all that comes together
Right.
to create the experience of being you.
It's a pretty incredible journey
Yeah.
that spans, centuries. From ancient theories to, really cutting-edge discoveries. We're going to be uncovering how our understanding of the brain has evolved, and I'm particularly excited to delve into the intricate workings of neurons and synapses. The building blocks of our thoughts, emotions, actions.
I'm especially curious about those early theories. I mean, did they even know what the brain was for back then?
Well, imagine this. In ancient Greece, the heart was considered the seat of intelligence and sensation.
Really?
Aristotle himself believed the brain was just a radiator to cool the blood.
Wow. That's so different from what we know today. So when did that perspective start to shift?
Well, during the Roman Empire, things began to change. Physicians like Galen, he was treating gladiators. Right?
Okay.
And he noticed that brain injuries directly impacted behavior.
Oh.
And so this kind of sparked the idea that different parts of the brain might have specific functions.
Makes sense to actually observe those direct consequences.
Right.
Would lead to a change in thinking.
Yeah.
But did that understanding continue to evolve, or did things kind of stall out for a while?
Yeah, you could say that. Progress slowed during the Middle Ages, and
Okay.
it wasn't until the Renaissance that interest in the brain really kind of rekindled.
Right.
And you had anatomists like Andreas Vesalius, and he meticulously dissected and illustrated the brain,
Wow.
providing this detailed anatomical knowledge, for the first time.
So we have the structure, but what about how it worked?
Right.
That must have taken a giant leap forward when we invented the microscope.
Absolutely. In the 19th century, staining techniques and microscopy, they revolutionized neuroscience.
Yeah.
And we had Camillo Golgi's silver stain, which allowed scientists to actually visualize
Wow.
individual neurons
Wow.
in their entirety
Wow.
and revealed this intricate structure.
It's like going from a blurry satellite image to exploring a city street by street.
Right.
This must be what led to the neuron doctrine then.
Yeah,
The idea that the brain is composed of these discrete units called neurons.
exactly.
Okay.
Santiago Ramon y Cajal, he used Golgi's technique
Okay.
to study different brain regions.
Okay.
And his meticulous observations led him to propose that neurons are individual entities
Yeah.
that communicate with each other, which completely changed our understanding of the brain.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have these neurons, but how do they actually work? What are they made of? And how do they generate those signals that make us think and feel and act?
Imagine this. A neuron is like a bustling city with different zones that are specialized
Oh.
for various tasks. The cell membrane, kind of like the city walls, right,
Okay.
regulates what enters and exits.
Yeah.
And inside, there's this dynamic scaffolding called the cytoskeleton.
Right.
It's constantly changing and moving to support the neuron's function.
That's such a cool analogy.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in one of the research papers, the cell membrane, it plays a key role in creating those electrical signals.
Yes,
Can you unpack that for us a little?
certainly. So the cell membrane, it's not just a passive barrier. It's studded with these things called ion channels.
Oh.
And those are protein gateways that allow specific ions to pass through.
Okay.
And the selective permeability is crucial. At rest, the neuron maintains a difference in electrical charge
Yeah.
between its inside and outside, and that's known as the resting membrane potential.
So the neuron's like a tiny battery storing that potential energy.
Right.
So then what triggers it to actually release that energy and send a
Right.
signal?
That's where the action potential comes in. And that's the electrical signal that
Ah.
neurons use to communicate over long distances. Picture this. When a neuron receives a strong enough signal,
Okay.
these ion channels, they open up and they allow sodium ions to flood in.
Oh, okay.
And it's like flipping a switch, right?
Okay.
Causing this rapid reversal of charge across the membrane and then sending that electrical impulse down the neuron's axon.
Okay. And this is where myelin comes in.
Yes.
That fatty insulation that helps the signal travel faster.
Exactly.
Okay.
Myelin acts like insulation on a wire, preventing the signal from leaking out and allowing it to jump between these gaps called nodes of Renvier.
So it's like taking the express train instead of making all the local stops.
Right.
Okay.
And this rapid transmission is crucial for things like reflexes
Okay.
and coordinated movements.
That makes sense. But the signal eventually has to reach another neuron, right?
Right.
They don't actually touch.
No.
So how does the message get across that gap?
That's where the magic of synapses happens.
Oh, okay.
When that electrical signal, it reaches the end of an axon, it triggers the release of these chemical messengers called neurotransmitters.
Right.
And these neurotransmitters, they cross this tiny gap between neurons called the synaptic cleft,
Right.
and then bind to receptors on the receiving neuron.
It's amazing how the communication switches from electrical to chemical there at the synapse.
Right.
So are neurotransmitters like specific keys fitting into unique locks?
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And depending on the neurotransmitter and receptor involved, the effect on that receiving neuron can be either excitatory, kind of pushing it closer to firing its own signal, or inhibitory, making it less likely to fire. And it's this complex system of checks and balances that allows for this incredibly nuanced communication in the brain.
So it's like this neural conversation with neurons sending excitatory yes votes and inhibitory no votes to each other.
Right, right.
But we've been talking about neurotransmitters kind of in this general sense.
Okay.
So what are some of the key players and what roles do they play in our thoughts and feelings and actions?
Well, let's start with one you've probably heard of. Dopamine. While it's often oversimplified as the feel-good neurotransmitter, it's actually more accurately involved in motivation and reward. And it plays a key role in things like learning and addiction and even movement disorders like Parkinson's disease.
Yeah. I've heard how dopamine's involved in those reward pathways that get hijacked in addiction.
Right.
So what about other neurotransmitters? What about serotonin? I know that one's linked to mood.
Yeah, serotonin's crucial for regulating mood and sleep and even social behavior. Low levels of serotonin have been implicated in depression.
Okay.
And medications like SSRIs, they work by increasing serotonin levels in the brain.
It's incredible how all these different neurotransmitters, each with their own unique roles, they all work together to orchestrate the complexity of our experiences.
It really is amazing.
But how do we even know where all these neurons are located and how they're connected? It's not like we can open up the skull and draw a map, right?
That's where the power of neuroimaging comes in. Techniques like diffusion tensor imaging or DTI, they allow us to visualize the pathways of axons, which are like the highways of neural communication in living brains.
So it's like creating a roadmap of the brain's connections, revealing how different regions actually communicate with each other.
Right.
And this must be how we understand, then, the brain's hierarchical organization.
Exactly.
How it develops from this, like, simple sheet of cells into this complex structure.
Yeah. During embryonic development, the nervous system begins as this single layer of cells called the ectoderm. And this sheet, it folds in on itself to form the neural tube, which eventually gives rise to the brain and spinal cord.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a remarkable process. It's intricate folding and specialization.
It's like origami on cellular level. But how does this developing brain become specialized?
Right.
To process different senses like taste and smell and sight. They seem so different, yet they all rely on the brain for interpretation.
Well, let's start with the chemical senses. Taste and smell. They rely on specialized receptors that can detect specific chemicals in our environment. For example, taste buds on our tongue can detect things like sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Whereas those olfactory receptors in our noses, they detect this vast array of odor molecules.
So it's like our tongues and noses are the front lines, gathering all that chemical information. And then sending it to the brain for processing. So what happens once those signals actually reach the brain? How do we perceive those tastes and smells?
That's where things get really interesting. So the brain, it doesn't just passively receive these signals, it actively constructs our perception of flavors and odors. So for example, a single odor can activate a combination of different olfactory receptors, And that creates this unique pattern of activation that our brain then interprets as a specific smell.
It's like a neural fingerprint for each odor. This makes me wonder, though, how does the brain differentiate between all those different tastes and smells? It seems like there would be so much overlap in those signals.
Yeah, you're touching upon one of the big mysteries in sensory processing. So the brain, it relies on this complex coding scheme. It's often referred to as population coding. And this is where different combinations of receptor activation create these distinct perceptions.
It's like using a limited alphabet to create a vast vocabulary of tastes and smells.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So we've got our chemical senses covered, but what about vision? Vision seems so much more complex.
Right.
It involves light and lenses and those amazing photoreceptors in the retina.
Right.
How does the brain even begin to process visual information?
Well, vision is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
But the basic principles are fascinating. So the eye acts like a camera, focusing light onto the retina, which is essentially a sheet of light-sensitive cells at the back of the eye.
Okay.
Right.
Right. I remember learning about rods and cones, those photoreceptor cells that convert light into electrical signals.
Yes.
Rods are for low light vision. Cones, let's see color, right?
Yeah.
But how does that information get from the eye to the brain?
So that's where the optic nerve comes in. It's a bundle of nerve fibers that carries those signals from the retina to the brain.
Okay.
It's like a high-speed cable transmitting visual data.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And then at the optic chiasm, some of these fibers cross over.
Oh, okay.
Sending information from the left visual field to the right side of the brain.
Okay.
And vice versa.
It's like a neural traffic intersection directing the visual data to the correct hemisphere of the brain.
Exactly.
So where does the information go after that intersection?
It travels to the lateral geniculate nucleus, or LGN, in the thalamus. So that's a relay station in the brain.
Yeah.
And from there, it's sent to the visual cortex, which is the part of the brain dedicated to processing visual information.
Okay. This whole visual pathway is remarkable.
Yeah.
It's like a chain of command passing the information from the eye to the brain, where it's finally analyzed and interpreted. But I imagine the visual cortex itself must be pretty complex, right?
Oh, yeah.
It can't just be one big processing center for everything that we see.
You're absolutely right. So the visual cortex is organized into different areas, each specialized for processing different aspects of vision. For example, the primary visual cortex, or V1, it's responsible for processing basic features like edges, lines, and orientation.
So V1's like the foundation?
Right.
And then other areas build upon that.
Yeah, it's like a division of labor within the brain.
Yeah, I remember reading about how some areas process motion, others color, and so on.
Right. Exactly. And this hierarchical organization, it allows the brain to efficiently process the vast amount of visual information we encounter every second, creating this rich and detailed representation of the world around us.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
This is all so fascinating.
Yeah.
But we've only just begun to explore the senses. I mean, we haven't even touched upon hearing and balance, both of which are so crucial for navigating the world. How does the brain process those senses? Are they similar to vision in terms of their pathways and processing centers?
Well, they're similar in that they involve these specialized receptors and neural pathways and dedicated processing areas in the brain. But the mechanisms and structures involved, they're unique to each sense, reflecting those different types of information they process.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's going on in the brain when we hear a sound, for example?
Okay, well, let's start with the ear, which is this marvel of engineering in itself. So sound waves, they enter the ear canal and they cause the eardrum to vibrate. And those vibrations are then transmitted through these tiny bones in the middle ear to the cochlea, a spiral-shaped structure filled with fluid.
I've always been fascinated by the cochlea, how it's shaped like a snail shell.
Yeah.
What was happening inside that little spiral?
So inside the cochlea, those vibrations in the fluid, they cause these tiny hair cells to bend. And those hair cells, they're the sensory receptors for sound. And their bending, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters, sending those signals along the auditory nerve to the brain.
It's like a microscopic dance floor with all those hair cells swaying to the rhythm of the sound waves.
Right, exactly.
But how do we distinguish between different sounds, like a high-pitched whistle versus a low rumble? Does that have something to do with those hair cells?
It does. So different parts of the basilar membrane, that's the structure within the cochlea. Where those hair cells sit are tuned to different frequencies. So high-frequency sounds activate hair cells near the base of the cochlea, whereas low-frequency sounds activate those hair cells near the apex.
It's like a musical keyboard with different keys corresponding to different frequencies.
Exactly.
That's incredible. That's so efficient.
Yeah, it is.
What about our sense of balance? Where does that come into play?
So that's the job of the vestibular system. It's located in the inner ear, right next to the cochlea. And it uses a similar mechanism of hair cells to detect head movement and position.
Okay.
And these hair cells are embedded in a gelatinous substance.
Okay.
And when we move our heads, the movement of that substance bends those hair cells, sending those signals to the brain.
So it's like our internal gyroscope.
Right.
Keeping us oriented in space.
Exactly.
But hearing and balance are just two of our senses. I mean, we also have touch, temperature, and pain.
Right.
All of which are crucial for interacting with our environment.
Right.
So do those senses rely on similar mechanisms, or are they completely different?
So they rely on different types of receptors and pathways, but the basic principle is the same. Specialized receptors in the skin detect specific stimuli and then send those signals to the brain for processing.
Okay, I see.
For example, we have mechanoreceptors. They detect pressure and vibration. Thermoreceptors, they detect temperature changes. And then nociceptors that detect pain.
I remember reading about how there are different types of pain fibers,
like
A delta fibers,
yes,
that transmit that sharp, fast pain, and then C fibers that transmit that dull, aching pain.
Yes.
Is that related to these different types of receptors?
Exactly. The type of receptor and the type of nerve fiber it connects to that determines the speed and quality of that pain signal reaching the brain. That's why we experience different types of pain, from the sharp, immediate pain of a paper cut to that dull, throbbing pain of a headache.
It's amazing how much complexity is packed into our skin. Constantly gathering information about the world around us.
It's amazing.
But we've been talking about all these senses. We haven't even touched upon movement yet. How does our brain control our muscles, allowing us to walk and talk and dance? Where does that information originate, and how does it reach our muscles?
Well, that's where the motor system comes in.
Okay.
And it involves this complex interplay of different brain regions, including the motor cortex, the basal ganglia, and the cerebellum. The motor cortex, which is located in the frontal lobe, is responsible for planning and initiating voluntary movements.
So the motor cortex is like the conductor of the orchestra, deciding which movements to make and when to make them.
Exactly.
But it can't do it alone, can it? Other parts of the brain must be involved in refining those movements and ensuring that they're smooth and coordinated.
Exactly. So the basal ganglia, they play a crucial role in refining and smoothing out those movements. While the cerebellum, which is located at the back of the brain, coordinates timing and precision.
It's like a neural ballet with different parts of the brain.
It is.
Working together to create these fluid and graceful movements.
It's amazing.
But what about movements that aren't voluntary, like reflexes? Those seem to happen so quickly that it doesn't seem like the brain even has time to get involved.
You're touching upon an important distinction there. So reflexes, they're controlled by circuits in the spinal cord that can bypass the brain, allowing for those rapid responses to potentially harmful stimuli.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like a shortcut.
It is.
In the nervous system, allowing for these lightning fast reactions when we need them.
Exactly.
But beyond voluntary movements and reflexes, we also have the autonomic nervous system. The one that controls all of those involuntary functions like heart rate and breathing and digestion. Is that part of the motor system as well?
It is, but it's a separate branch. And it's controlling those functions that keep us alive and functioning without us having to consciously think about them.
Oh, wow.
Right. And the autonomic nervous system has two branches. The sympathetic nervous system, which kind of ramps up our bodies for action in those fight or flight situations. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms things down in that rest and digest mode.
It's like a neural tug of war.
It is.
With the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. Constantly adjusting our internal settings to keep us in balance. But all of this intricate neural circuitry ultimately boils down to one question. What makes us tick? What drives our behaviors? What motivates us to act and shapes our desires? It can't just be these basic systems working in isolation.
You're getting at the heart of what makes us human. Motivation. It's that driving force behind our actions, pushing us to seek out rewards, avoid punishments. And while it's a complex interplay of many factors, the hypothalamus, this small but mighty brain region, plays a key role.
I remember reading about how the hypothalamus is involved in regulating those basic drives like hunger and thirst and sex.
Yeah.
Like the brain's control center for all of those essential behaviors.
Exactly. The hypothalamus receives input from various parts of the brain and the body.
Okay.
It's monitoring our internal state.
Okay.
And ensuring our basic needs are met. Yeah. And then it orchestrates this complex interplay of hormonal and neural signals to drive those behaviors that ensure our survival and well-being.
So it's like the hypothalamus is constantly checking in.
It is.
Asking, are we hungry? Are we thirsty? In need of a mate?
Yeah.
And then it sends out those signals
right.
to motivate us to take action.
Exactly.
But speaking of sex, that's not just a basic drive, is it? Yeah. It's also deeply intertwined with our emotions and social connections.
Right.
How does the brain navigate those more complex aspects of sexuality?
That's where the interplay between hormones and the brain becomes particularly fascinating. So hormones like testosterone and estrogen, they not only shape our physical development, right? But they also influence our brains, leading to these sex differences in behavior and cognition.
So it's not just a matter of boys will be boys or girls will be girls.
Right.
There are actual biological differences in the brain that contribute to those behavioral differences.
Right.
But those differences are also shaped by our experiences and our social interactions.
Right, absolutely.
It's not just nature versus nurture. It's this complex interplay of both.
It is. And understanding how our biology and our environment interact to shape our behaviors and our desires and ultimately our identities.
Yeah.
That's one of the most exciting frontiers in neuroscience.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
It is.
But it's amazing to see how much we've learned.
That's great.
At the brain, from its basic structure to its complex functions.
Yeah.
And we're only just getting started.
I know. It's exciting.
I can't wait to dive into even more fascinating topics in the next part of our deep dive.
Me too.
Okay, so we've navigated this intricate world of neurons and synapses and those amazing sensory pathways. Now I'm ready to tackle some of the bigger mysteries. Emotions, memory, language, even consciousness. These things feel so intangible, yet they're all rooted in the physical workings of the brain. It's mind-blowing to think about.
It really is. We've laid the groundwork by understanding, those building blocks of the brain, and now we can kind of explore how they orchestrate these really complex human experiences that define us.
So let's start with emotions. They feel so powerful, so immediate. How does the brain even begin to process something as abstract as feelings?
Well, emotions aren't as abstract as you might think. They involve this really complex interplay of, physiological changes, behavioral responses, and subjective experiences, all orchestrated by specific brain regions and neural circuits. One key player is the limbic system, a network of structures that's deep within the brain.
I've heard of the limbic system. I always get it mixed up with other parts of the brain. What exactly does it do?
Think of it as the brain's emotional hub. It includes structures like the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus, each playing a unique role in processing and regulating emotions. The amygdala, for example, is crucial for detecting and responding to threats, triggering that fight or flight response that we talked about earlier.
So the amygdala is like the brain's alarm system, constantly scanning for danger, preparing us to react.
That's a great analogy. And the hippocampus, which is closely connected to the amygdala, plays a vital role in forming and retrieving memories, particularly those with, emotional significance. And this connection explains why emotional memories can be so vivid and long-lasting.
It's like those emotional memories are tagged with extra importance, making them stick around longer. So the limbic system is handling the basic emotional responses. But what about those more nuanced aspects of emotions, like the subjective experience of feeling happy or sad? Where does that come into play?
That's where the prefrontal cortex, that executive control center we discussed earlier,
Okay.
it receives input from the limbic system and other brain regions, helping us to regulate our emotional responses, to make decisions based on our feelings, and even to understand the emotions of others.
So it's like the prefrontal cortex is the conductor, kind of integrating that raw emotional input from the limbic system and shaping it into this coherent and meaningful experience. It's fascinating how these different brain regions work together to create this rich tapestry of our emotional lives.
It truly is. And as we learn more about these neural circuits, we gain a deeper understanding of how emotions influence our thoughts and our behaviors, and ultimately our well-being.
Okay, so emotions are starting to make a little more sense to me now. But what about memory? It's such a fundamental part of who we are, yet it feels so elusive at times. Where are memories stored in the brain? How do we access them? Is there like a filing cabinet somewhere with all of our memories neatly organized?
That's a question that has intrigued scientists and philosophers for centuries. And while we don't have all the answers, we've made some remarkable progress in understanding the neural basis of memory. One key insight is that memories aren't stored in one specific location. They're distributed throughout the brain, encoded in the connections between neurons.
So it's not like there's this memory center in the brain.
Right.
It's more like a web of interconnected neurons, with each memory represented by a unique pattern of connections.
Exactly.
Right.
And one of the key players in forming new memories is the hippocampus, that structure we mentioned earlier that's part of the limbic system.
Okay.
It acts like this neural librarian,
Well,
receiving information from various parts of the brain, processing it, and then sending it back out for long-term storage in other regions.
so the hippocampus is like a temporary holding cell for new memories, where they're kind of sorted and cataloged before being filed away in the vast archives of the cortex.
That's a great analogy. But the hippocampus isn't just about forming new memories, it's also involved in retrieving those memories when we need them. You
Right.
know, it acts like this search engine, kind of helping us access those stored patterns of neural activity that represent our past experiences.
It's incredible to think that every memory, every experience we've ever had is encoded in those connections between these tiny neurons.
It really is.
But memory isn't just about facts and events, right? We also have those procedural memories, the ones that allow us to ride a bike, play a musical instrument without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
Where are those types of memories stored?
Those procedural memories, they rely on different brain regions, primarily the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. Those structures involved in motor control and coordination.
Okay.
And those regions are responsible for, automating those skills and habits, making them so ingrained that we can perform them effortlessly.
So it's like our brains are constantly learning and adapting, creating these neural shortcuts,
Yeah.
allowing us to navigate the world more efficiently.
Exactly.
I'm curious, how reliable are our memories? Are they accurate representations of the past, or can they be distorted or even completely fabricated?
That's a fascinating and important question, and one that has significant implications for eyewitness testimony and our understanding of history. The truth is, memories aren't always reliable. They can be influenced by our emotions, our beliefs, and even new information that we encounter.
So our memories aren't like video recordings of the past. They're more like reconstructions, subject to interpretation, even distortion.
Exactly. Every time we recall a memory, we're essentially reactivating those neural patterns that represent that experience. But in the process, those patterns can be modified, influenced by our current state of mind, our emotions, and even suggestions from others.
That's a little unsettling to think that our memories can be so malleable.
Yeah.
But it also highlights the importance of critical thinking, right?
Right.
Of questioning our own memories and recognizing that they're not always objective truths.
Absolutely. Understanding the fallibility of memory is crucial for making informed decisions, evaluating evidence, and even navigating our personal relationships.
Okay, so emotions and memory are starting to make a little more sense now. But what about language? It seems like such a uniquely human ability, so complex, so nuanced. How does the brain even begin to process something as abstract as language?
Language is indeed one of the most remarkable achievements of the human brain, and it involves this complex interplay of different brain regions, each one specialized for different aspects of language processing.
So it's not just one part of the brain that handles language. It's a whole network of regions working together.
Exactly. One key area is Broca's area, located in the frontal lobe,
Okay.
and it's involved in speech production. And damage to Broca's area can lead to Broca's aphasia, a condition where people have difficulty speaking fluently, even though they can understand language.
I remember learning about that in one of the textbook excerpts. It's amazing how specific brain damage can lead to, such specific language impairments. What about understanding language? Is there a separate area for that?
Yes. Wernicke's area, located in the temporal lobe, is crucial for language comprehension. And damage to Wernicke's area can lead to Wernicke's aphasia. And that's where people can speak fluently, but their speech is often nonsensical because they have difficulty understanding the meaning of words.
So we have one area for speaking and another for understanding. But how do these areas work together to create that seamless experience of language?
That's still an active area of research, but we know that these areas, along with other regions involved in auditory processing, memory, and conceptual knowledge, are interconnected in these really complex networks. These networks allow us to seamlessly integrate the sounds of words, their meanings, and their grammatical structures, creating that rich tapestry of human language.
It's mind-blowing to think about all the neural processes that must be happening every time we speak or hear a sentence.
It really is.
But language isn't just about communicating with others. It also shapes our thoughts. It influences our emotions. It even shapes our perception of the world.
You're absolutely right. Language is this powerful tool, not only for communication, but also for cognition. It allows us to categorize and organize our experiences, to think abstractly, to plan for the future, and to share our thoughts and feelings with others.
It's like language is the operating system of our minds, shaping the way we think and experience the world.
Yeah.
It's truly what sets us apart from other animals.
I agree. Our capacity for language is one of the defining features of our species, and it's a testament to the remarkable complexity and adaptability of the human brain.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground: emotions, memory, and language. But now I'm ready to tackle the big one: consciousness.
Okay.
It's such an elusive concept, almost mystical, How can something as material as the brain give rise to something as immaterial as consciousness?
That's the million-dollar question in neuroscience.
Yeah.
And one that has challenged philosophers and scientists for centuries. While we don't have a complete answer, we've made some significant progress in understanding the neural correlates of consciousness, those brain activity patterns associated with different states of awareness.
So we can't pinpoint exactly what consciousness is, but we can observe what's happening in the brain when someone is conscious.
Exactly. For example, we know that certain brain regions, like the prefrontal cortex and the thalamus, are crucial for maintaining wakefulness and awareness. And studies using brain imaging techniques have shown that the activity in these regions changes dramatically during sleep, anesthesia, and coma, states where consciousness is altered or absent.
So it's like we're starting to map the neural landscape of consciousness, identifying the key players and observing how their activity changes during different states of awareness. But consciousness isn't just about being awake and aware, right? It also involves our subjective experiences, our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. How do those fit into the picture?
That's where things get really interesting, and where we're still grappling with, answers. One promising avenue of research is exploring this concept of integrated information. And that's the idea that consciousness arises from this complex interplay of different brain regions, each processing, specialized information. And the more interconnected those regions are, the more integrated information there is, and the richer our conscious experience becomes.
So it's not just the activity of individual neurons that matters, but the way they communicate and share information with each other. The more interconnected the brain, the more conscious it becomes.
That's the basic idea. And this theory helps explain why damage to certain brain regions, particularly those involved in connecting different areas, can lead to these profound alterations in consciousness, even if the individual neurons themselves are still functioning.
It's also fascinating, but it's also incredibly complex. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of understanding consciousness.
We are.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so exciting. The study of consciousness is one of the most challenging and rapidly evolving areas in neuroscience. And every new discovery brings us closer to unraveling this profound mystery of the human mind.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued, and I'm sure our listener is too.
Yeah.
This whole deep dive has been an incredible journey, from the microscopic workings of neurons to the grand mystery of consciousness.
Right.
I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all this information, but in a good way.
I understand.
It's like my brain has expanded to accommodate all these new ideas.
I know. It's a lot to take in. But it's a testament to the incredible capacity of the human brain to learn and adapt and expand its understanding of the world.
Yeah.
And we're not done yet. There's still so much more to explore.
Okay. I'm still reeling from that deep dive into consciousness.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that all those complex thoughts and feelings and experiences arise from those intricate interactions of neurons.
It is.
But I'm also curious about the brain's limitations. We've talked about its incredible capacity for learning and adaptation.
Right.
But what about when things go wrong? How does neuroscience shed light on those neurological and psychiatric disorders that disrupt our thoughts and our emotions and behaviors?
That's an important question.
Yeah.
And one that neuroscience is increasingly equipped to address.
Okay.
Neurological and psychiatric disorders, they're often incredibly complex, involving this multifaceted interplay of, genetic predispositions, environmental factors, and disruptions in brain function.
Right.
But by understanding those underlying neural mechanisms, we can start to develop more effective treatments and interventions.
So it's not just a matter of chemical imbalances. as it's often oversimplified.
Right.
There's a lot more going on in the brain than just too much or too little of a certain neurotransmitter.
Exactly.
Oh.
Take Alzheimer's disease, for example.
Okay.
While it's characterized by this decline in cognitive function,
Right.
particularly memory, the underlying cause is the buildup of these abnormal protein aggregates in the brain.
Yep.
And they disrupt communication between neurons and ultimately lead to cell death.
So it's like those protein aggregates are gumming up the works, preventing those intricate neural networks from functioning properly.
Exactly.
What about other disorders, like Parkinson's disease? I know that one involves dopamine.
Right.
But how does that actually translate into the tremors and movement difficulties that people experience?
So in Parkinson's disease, there's this progressive loss of dopamine-producing neurons in a specific area of the brain called the substantia nigra.
Okay.
And this area plays a crucial role in initiating and controlling movements.
Okay.
So as those dopamine neurons die off, the brain's ability to regulate movement becomes impaired.
So it's like the brain's motor control system is losing its fuel,
right,
causing those debilitating movement problems.
Yeah, it really highlights the interconnectedness and delicate balance of the brain. And this complexity is even more apparent in psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia, where those underlying neural mechanisms are still being unraveled.
I know schizophrenia is often characterized by hallucinations and delusions, but I've always struggled to understand how those experiences are connected to the brain.
Right.
It seems so far removed from that physical world of neurons and synapses.
It is complex, but research suggests that abnormalities in glutamate signaling, that excitatory neurotransmitter we talked about, might play a key role. Disruptions in glutamate signaling, they can disrupt communication between different brain regions. Leading to those distortions in perception and thought that characterize schizophrenia.
So it's like the brain's wiring diagram is getting scrambled, causing those profound disruptions in how people experience reality.
It is.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
It is.
But it's also hopeful to know that researchers are making progress in understanding these complex disorders, hopefully paving the way for better treatments and maybe even cures someday.
I agree. And this research isn't just about understanding disorders, right? It's also providing valuable insights into the healthy brain, revealing that incredible plasticity and adaptability of this remarkable organ. Did you know that our brains continue to change and adapt throughout our lives, from childhood to old age?
I've heard about the brain's plasticity, like how it can rewire itself based on our experiences. But I always thought that was mostly limited to childhood when the brain is still developing. Are you saying that even our adult brains are still changing?
Absolutely. While it's true that plasticity is most pronounced during childhood, our brains retain the ability to learn new information, form new memories, and even rewire themselves after injury throughout our lives.
Wow.
And this lifelong plasticity is what allows us to adapt to new environments, acquire new skills, and even recover from things like stroke or traumatic brain injury.
That's incredible. Gives me a whole new perspective on aging. I used to think it was all downhill after a certain point. But now I'm realizing that our brains still have so much potential.
They do.
Even as we get older.
Exactly. And while aging does bring certain challenges, like a gradual decline in cognitive function, for some individuals, there are things we can do to promote brain health and maintain our cognitive abilities.
Like what? Give us the inside scoop. What can we do to keep our brains sharp and agile as we age?
Well, based on the research, it seems like a combination of lifestyle factors plays a crucial role. Engaging in mentally stimulating activities, staying physically active, eating a healthy diet, getting enough sleep, managing stress, and nurturing our social connections all contribute to a healthy brain.
So it's not about finding some magic pill or brain training app. It's about living a healthy and balanced life.
It is.
Challenging our minds. Staying connected with others. Taking care of our bodies.
Exactly. And these factors don't just benefit the brain. They promote overall health and well-being. It's a win-win situation.
I love that. It's empowering to know that we have some control over our brain health. Even as we age. You mentioned something earlier that I wanted to circle back to. The social brain. What does that even mean? Is there a specific part of the brain that's dedicated to, social interactions?
Well, the social brain isn't a single structure, but rather a network of brain regions that work together to enable us to navigate that complex world of social interactions.
Right.
And this network includes areas that are involved in recognizing faces, interpreting emotions, understanding the intentions of others, and even experiencing empathy.
So it's like our brains are wired for connection, for understanding and responding to other people.
Yeah.
It makes sense, given how important social interactions are for our survival and well-being. But I'm curious, how much of this social brain is hardwired?
Right.
Versus how much is shaped by our experiences?
That's a great question, and one that researchers are still exploring.
Yeah.
It seems like there's this delicate interplay between our genes and our environment. Certain aspects of social behavior, like our capacity for empathy, might be influenced by our genes, while others, like our social skills and cultural norms, are shaped by our upbringing and experiences.
So we're not just born with this, like, fixed set of social skills.
Right.
We're constantly learning and adapting, fine-tuning those social brains. Based on those interactions that we have with others.
Exactly. And this ongoing plasticity is what allows us to form strong bonds, navigate those complex social situations, and even overcome social challenges.
Wow, this whole deep dive into the brain has been incredible.
It has.
We've covered so much ground, from the basic building blocks of neurons and synapses to those complex functions of emotions and memory and language, and even consciousness.
It's amazing.
It's left me with a sense of awe and wonder at the incredible power and complexity of this organ that resides within our skulls.
It is remarkable. The brain is truly a remarkable organ, capable of incredible feats of learning, adaptation, and creativity. And while we've made significant progress in understanding its workings, there are still so many mysteries left to unravel.
I know.
The journey of neuroscience is ongoing. Who knows what incredible discoveries lie ahead?
It's exciting to think about all the possibilities.
It is.
I'm feeling inspired to keep learning, keep exploring the mysteries of the brain, and to apply what we've learned to live healthier, more fulfilling lives. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, the brain is a dynamic and ever-evolving organ.
Yes.
Keep those synapses firing, those neurons buzzing, and never stop exploring the wonders of your own mind.